If you're a new Fujifilm user, in today's video I want to show you 10 tips for you to get the best out of your Fujifilm camera. The first tip is simple, but it's how to use auto mode on this camera. On other brands you might have one single button to put your camera in auto if you are using a PASM dials. However, on Fujifilm camera, and especially on the XT series, it's a little bit different. In order for you to put your camera in automatic, you will have to use 3 dials. The ISO dial, the shutter speed dial, as well as the aperture dial that is on your Fujifilm lens. To place your camera in auto mode, place all those 3 dials in the A position, A for auto. And that way your camera will handle the exposure. You won't have to care about the ISO, the shutter speed, or the aperture. And while this is a good method to start, however, I would advise you to learn how to expose manually in the future, and you can check out this video somewhere here where I explain to you how to do that. Next, let's talk about JPEG versus RAW. Your Fujifilm camera is able to shoot RAW, meaning that you're able to export the information that comes out directly of your sensor, directly to a card or your computer. Then from this information, you're able to make edits. However, you can also shoot JPEG on this camera. And the particularity of JPEGs coming out from Fujifilm is the Fujifilm recipes or film simulation. Those film simulation basically allows you to have some film-like look to your JPEG directly embedded on your images. Your Fujifilm camera should come with already included film simulation, the most famous one being Classic Chrome, Provia, Eterna, and more. However, you are also able to create film simulations, and there are tons of resources out there that you can check to have film simulation that look exactly the way you want it to look. And that way you basically won't have to edit much. All you have to do is to take pictures, and the JPEG that you will take out of those cameras will look already like they are kind of edited. For you to select your film simulation, all you have to do is to click on the right arrow of your menu here and directly select your film simulation. You can also go into your menu, select image quality setting, and go down to film simulation. Now, I will also leave in the description some resources for you to check more film simulations out there, and you can explore that way to see which one fits you the best. Next, let's talk about button settings. There are tons of customizable buttons on your Fujifilm camera, whether it is in the back or in the front or even on top of your camera here. And by setting those buttons to customizable functions that you use, you will save tons of time, and at one point you won't even have to look down on your camera to be able to enable some functions. For example, in my case, I use this button right here to enable face detection, this one for subject detection, this one for focus lock, and that way I know that I am able to easily switch from one subject to another, as well as lock focus when needed. And this is extremely helpful when you're out there and there are tons of moving subjects and you have to switch from one subject to another. So if you want to customize all the buttons on your Fujifilm camera, all that you have to do is to long press the display back button until you have this screen appearing. And then you go individually on each button and set them to the function that you want to do. If you buy a new SD card, you put it directly to your Fujifilm camera, you might have some issues using it at first. And the reason is that your SD card needs to be formatted in camera to make sure that you get the best result. So in order to do so, you can either go to the standard way through the menu. However, this is a little bit tedious and long to do. So here is a way to do it faster. If you have a camera with a clickable back dial, like let's say the X-T5, all you have to do is to long press the trash button as well as the back dial. Once you do that, you will have this screen appearing, and all you have to do is to select the memory card slot that you want to format. Now, if you have something like let's say the XH2 or XH2S, where the back dial is not clickable, all you have to do is to long press the trash button and the arrow down here around the menu area. And from there, it's basically the same story. Now let's talk about view mode. You might have been confused that sometimes the screen of your camera goes dark, or that while you look through your EVF, you still don't see anything. And that has basically everything to do with the view mode of your camera. In this camera, let's say the X-T5 for example, you can basically switch between view modes. Whether you want your LCD only to be available, if you want only your EVF to be to display information, or if you want both of them to at all time to display information, or if you want the sensor to switch between the LCD and the EVF. If your EVF is based on the sensor, that might be the reason why when you do this, that your screen goes dark here. And that might be why you are confused sometimes on why your LCD screen goes dark. So all you have to do is to press this particular button right here and switch between view modes. Now let's talk about focus modes. There are 3 focus modes here on this camera: single, manual, as well as continuous. Basically, if your subject is not moving towards or away from your camera, you will want to use single mode autofocus. If they are moving towards and away from the camera, then use continuous autofocus. And if you want to handle it yourself, meaning that you want to manually focus your lens, then use manual mode. But that's not all, because you are also able to tell your camera on which part of the image it should be tracking focus. Let's say that you are doing continuous autofocus and you want your camera to track focus. On which part of the image should it be tracking? Well, you can either use single point meaning that it will track only on the particular point right here on your screen. And this is advised for single autofocus, because you will really define a single point in a single moment of your frame and let your camera do the tracking once, and that way you can work around with your composition. Now you have zone autofocus, and zone autofocus is advised for continuous autofocus mode, where you know that your subject will stay in a particular zone and you will let the camera do the tracking for this particular area. And finally, you have wide tracking, which is suitable for sports or other activity where the subject is going to move quite a lot, and you will basically do a tracking in a bigger zone. And you also have the all, where you let the camera do the tracking on the whole image that you're taking. So if your subject is not moving at all, I would do single autofocus with single point. If your subject is moving but not that quick, I would recommend continuous autofocus as well as zone tracking. Then if you're doing sports, if you're doing really fast moving subject, wide tracking or all is a good recommendation in my opinion with continuous autofocus. And now let's move on to subject detection. The new FUJIFILM camera and the latest generation of FUJIFILM camera have subject detection within the body, meaning that you're able to track subjects such as humans, animals, train, cars, plane, and more. Now, I do believe that the way that it is implemented in the FUJIFILM menu is a bit counterintuitive, because the human detection and the subject detection is separated. But here is how you can enable it. Click on your menu and go down to AFMF, then go all the way down to face detection setting if you want to enable the human detection. And you can use eye off, meaning that it will only detect the faces of the people, eye detection, right eye priority or left eye priority. For any other subject, meaning animal, bird, car, bike, airplane or train, you can go down to subject detection setting and enable it there. If you don't want it to be enabled, you can just set it to off. Alright, so now let's talk a little bit about lenses. Typically when you get started, a good way to get started is with a good zoom lens. And while there are quite a lot of options out there, I would recommend the 18-55mm kit lens instead of the 16-80, and that is a personal recommendation because I personally prefer that lens. It is smaller, more compact, and the images that I got with the 18-55, in my opinion, are much better than the 16-80. Now, if you want to venture in the world of prime lenses, I think that a first prime lens to start with is the 35mm f2. 35mm on APS-C is a 50mm equivalent and will be a very good versatile tool and versatile focal length that you'll be able to use on a lot of genre of photography and be able to explore basically to find what is good for you. Plus the image quality of the 35mm f2, while being very tiny, very compact, also being weather resistant, is very good. Additionally, there are tons of options on the secondary market as well, so I'm pretty sure that you can get it for pretty cheap. Now let's talk accessories that you can get for your Fujifilm camera. If you are like me and you have big hands, what you can do is to get an L bracket that will basically give you a bigger grip for your XT series. Typically for the XH series, if that's your first Fujifilm camera, you don't necessarily need an L bracket, but maybe a cage will be something that you want to invest in for future use for video. I would also recommend to get a good strap, whether it is a wrist strap or a neck strap. Personally, I always recommend Peak Design because of the quality of their straps, as well as the fact that it is so easy to interchange each strap depending on your use. And my final tip is to simply practice, practice, and practice. There are tons of techniques to learn with those cameras, tons of particularities and tons of composition techniques as well that you can learn to get better at photography. So if you want to learn more about your Fujifilm camera, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you want to learn how to expose manually on your Fujifilm camera, then watch this video right here where I teach you how to do exactly that.